Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign review, this time covering Aranessa Saltspite. So Aranessa's start position is Sartosa, the same start position she's always had, and she starts at war with Tilia, which is a pretty easy enemy to deal with because you can just out-recruit them straight away. Raising the dead along here is really easy, and your early game units are better than theirs, so just rush at them, get to Maragliano quickly, and you've got yourself essentially two really good provinces right off the get-go. After you've taken Tilia out, I'd highly recommend destroying Clan Angrind, because they will probably declare war on you, but you can deal with your early game issues before them. So while they're still dealing with the greenskins and trying to get to Karak-Izor, you could destroy Zarak-Zil and Karak-Biftar over here and essentially wipe them out. I don't really recommend occupying them because these territories here will be hard to hold due to the Wood Elves probably picking a fight with you, and that going into Athel Loren as the Vampire Coast is probably not ideal. What you want to do is just take them out and then go for richer settlements, such as the Border Princes out this way here, which will be ripe for the picking, and a lot of good port settlements out here to capture, as long as good resources. So, let's talk about Aranessa himself. I think that overall her campaign is very strong in the early stage. Probably has one of the strongest early campaigns out of any Legendary Lord in the game. But I'd say that her mid to late campaign is exceedingly boring, because a lot of her special effects just wear out by like turn 20. So this is the campaign that I would kind of recommend that you play for about 20, 30 turns and then ditch for something a bit more interesting. It could also be a good campaign for you to learn how to play the game since it's so easy, but it's entirely up to you. Now another thing is that I actually don't think that Aranessa belongs in the Vampire Coast as in that particular race. I think she suits more to be a Norscan Legendary Lord, because of the Vampire Coast, not all of them are vampires, right? You got Luther, Harkon, and Noctilus. They're vampires. Silostra isn't a vampire, but she is undead. But she's also not a lore character. She was just made up for Total War Warhammer. So you can sort of just make up whatever you want with her. But Aranessa Saltspite is a lore character. She does exist in the lore. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense for her to have like undead units under her command. She's not a spellcaster. She is a pirate. So you can't just have her having just Sartosa Free Company, right? So I think it makes a bit more sense for her to have like Norscan Marauders in her army and that kind of stuff. That's my personal opinion. You can either agree or disagree. It doesn't matter. It's not likely for her to change. But I think that her in the Vampire Coast just doesn't really make much sense. Now, if we have a look at her her abilities and skills, I think a lot of the stuff is kind of weak and also really only useful in the early stages of the campaign. Her trait is Queen of Tides, which provides counter aura leadership effect plus 12, melee attack plus 8 for Sartosan units, weapon strength plus 20% for Sartosan units, which is fairly good in the early stages of the campaign, but the Sartosan units are just Sartosa Free Company and Sartosa Militia. They're tier 1 units, which are not going to be useful in the later stages of the campaign, even with those boosts, so I would be phasing them out very early on. So that's going to come out of effect completely very early. Then in terms of her skill line, she's got a lot of options here for sure, but most of them are quite generic. So all of this stuff here, you got the melee line, red line, blue line, and then this stuff here is unique to the Vampire Coast characters. So her unique line over here is what she's got. So she got the trait Mutant, which gives her hit points plus 8% and perfect vigor. Sawfish Pegleg, armor plus 15, weapon strength plus 8%. Creatures of Manan, which gives reduced upkeep cost for Sartosan units, Rotting Promethean and Rotting Leviathans. Now, I'm not a huge fan of those particular units, the Rotting Prometheans and Leviathans. They're hardly my favorite. My biggest issue with those units is that they're really sort of clunky and they're kind of slow for like a monster unit. And while they're kind of tanky, they're actually really susceptible to getting shot. So the extra missile resistance definitely helps them. But because they've got very large hitboxes, they're so easy to kill with any kind of missile attack. And also any kind of anti-large. So these are units that have a lot of weaknesses, which is why I usually try to avoid them. Then you've got Gifted Sailor over here. Campaign movement range plus 5%, casualty replenishment rate plus 6%, and leadership plus 8 for Sartosan units, which, you know, the Sartosan units will be long gone by about this point anyway. Self-taught Gunner, ammunition plus 15% for Carronade, Mortar, and Queen Bess units. That'll be useful because those are troops that are useful all throughout the campaign. And then army ability uses +1 for Norse Roar, Zufbar, 42 Pounder, and Sartosa Grapeshot. Then you've got your worst nightmare over here. Increased plunder from encounters at sea, faction wide. That is actually pretty good, you know, as long as you're actually going out there and getting those sea plunders. But if you're not doing it, then you're not going to get the effects of it. Melee attack plus 8 and ward save plus 5%, which, you know, that's a pretty good skill there. Then you've got her mount over here, Rotting Prometheus. Now, The Rotting Promethean, I am not a fan of, because I'd actually even go so far as to say this is probably the worst mount in the game. If we have a look at just the raw stats that it provides a small hit point boost, a pretty sizable armor boost, 1 extra speed, and you lose 10 extra melee attack. Now here's the thing. Aranessa Saltspite on foot is very strong, because for one thing, on the higher battle difficulties, the AI won't try to shoot at her. And even if they did, they wouldn't hit her. But a Rotting Promethean is not that quick, and it is quite large. So missile units, especially on the higher battle difficulties, will gun for you, making that if you go up against anyone that's got any kind of missile units and you're on a Rotting Promethean, you basically can't use Aranessa on the front line. You have to pull her back. So I would only ever put her on a Rotting Promethean if she was going up against an entirely melee faction. So this unit here has a severe weakness for her. So my recommendation would be do not put her on that. Then she's got Lucky Charm and Tenacity over here, which is useful. Now she's also got some unique abilities over here. Spearfisher's Net, which is good for pinning down enemy heroes and lords to get them and get them into melee. But you can only put them if they're on the ground. And then you've got Manan's Luck here, which gives you extra melee defense and damage resistance for 15 seconds, which is pretty good. Then if we have a look at her items, she's got Kraken's Bane, which gives income from raiding 25%, melee attack plus 10, weapon strength plus 25%, and then passive ability in an area, 35 meters, bonus versus large, and melee attack, so that's a pretty good weapon there. Now if we have a look at her faction effects for Sartosa, you got Diplomatic Relations minus 100 with Norska, which is totally useless because there are no Norscan factions anywhere near you, so encountering Norska in the early stages of the campaign, which is the only part where it actually matters, it's just irrelevant, so that even being there just doesn't matter at all. Chance of finding treasure maps plus 25%. That seems good on paper, except for the fact that treasure maps is probably one of the weakest mechanics in the entire game, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. So I do not care about finding treasure maps. The vast majority of treasure maps that I get, I just trash anyway, so I just don't care. Income from raiding plus 50%. That seems like a lot, but it actually isn't. It's just not a good way to play the Vampire Coast. If you want to make money as Vampire Coast, plunder settlements. Don't sit there raiding them, because it's just a really weak way to make money. Then you've got income from sacking settlements plus 20%. So that is actually good. So overall, I think that's probably the weakest faction effect out of any of the Vampire Coast faction, and probably some of the weakest in the entire game across all Legendary Lords. Now, looking at raiding income, I know we're only sitting in a minor settlement over here, but that raiding income is only 72. So whoop-de-doo, extra 50% there. It's just not that big of a deal. So you would have to raid in a really rich province in order to get any effect out of it. But the thing is, sacking settlements is able to provide you with so much more money than raiding. And the thing is, when you go into raid stance, you lose a lot of campaign movement range. Whereas you could go into encamp stance and be immune to attrition, get huge stat bonuses, be able to recruit, and it doesn't require any movement whatsoever. So when playing as Vampire Coast, I usually use the encamp stance, so I just don't use this stance at all. But if you're playing as Norska, right, Norska has the raiding encamp stance, right, which doesn't require any movement, puts you into a raiding stance, so you're, whatever enemy territory you're in, you're automatically raiding, and you get those extra effects as well. So if all of this stuff was as part of Norska, that would be way more useful for her. In addition to that, you've also got this one over here, which I forgot to mention, the Saw Shark's Blade. Enable lightning strike battles when reinforcements are present, income from raiding plus 30%, extra casualty replenishment rate, and income from sacking settlements. So with that enable lightning strike reinforcements are present, it's actually redundant if you select her skill here, so don't actually go and get that. It doesn't make any sense that you'd just be wasting skill points. Now, talking about the treasure map system. I've spoken about this briefly in the past, but I think it's a really crappy system. So on turn 1, you're able to get a treasure hoard from here. So on turn 1, getting 2,000 gold and 150 infamy, that's pretty good, right? But most of the treasure maps that you get are not going to be in your starting area, and when you dig for treasure, it uses up all of your movement. So if you get a treasure map that's, say, in Lustria, right, and you think, okay, it's going to be another 2 grand for me, I'm going to send this hero to go and dig in for that treasure. Another thing you got to consider is that while you're sending someone over to go and dig for that treasure, you're still paying them upkeep. So you better get that done within like 5 turns, or else it's not even worth it. So the only time it's ever really worth digging for treasure is if you find a map in an area that you already own. Otherwise, don't even bother, because you're just not really going to get much value out of it. I'm pretty sure that the maximum amount of treasury income that you get out of it is 5,000 gold. And it wouldn't be that big of a deal if you didn't have to waste all of your movement checking for it, but it's an entirely forgettable mechanic. And getting infamy is way easier just by fighting battle and just playing the game. So this is a very forgettable mechanic. So getting extra treasure maps for that, I just don't think it's very valuable. So overall, I'm not particularly fond of how Aranessa has been implemented in this campaign, and I don't really recommend her for anything other than just practicing the race, because she's got a really easy start position, and I kind of hope they do something with her to make her more interesting later on in Immortal Empires, because right now I just don't recommend even playing her. If you're a seasoned veteran of this game, you're looking for a new faction to play, I'd give Aranessa a complete miss. It is not a fun campaign. It's just boring on all difficulties, in my opinion. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with this take on Aranessa. Obviously, it was quite a negative one. They can't all be positive. Some of these legendary lords just aren't that interesting, in my opinion. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.